Hello everyone, and yes, thank you for joining us today. We are back with our webinars. We have quite enough of polls. So this is our first webinar this year. And just before starting, I wanted to tell what's Sci-Hub Armenia. Sci-Hub Armenia is an initiative that is being implemented by Enterprise Incubator Foundation. It's supported by the Armenian government and the World Bank, and is implemented in partnership with several public and private partners. So the main aim of the initiative is to promote the cybersecurity sector in Armenia through various pillars. And the webinar series are one of the ways where we are trying to bring the top international experts and professionals in the cybersecurity industry to share their expertise, their knowledge with us, hence ensuring that the InfoSec community in Armenia is also getting access to this top talent from the top of the world. So talking about that, I'm very happy to present to our amazing speaker, Adrian Sanabria joining us from United States. He is the founder of Security Weekly Labs at Cyber Risk Alliance and an expert with almost 20 years of experience in cybersecurity area. So I've heard several webinars, and I had the privilege to also work in some areas with Adrian, and his expertise is just amazing. And I'm really happy that Adrian, thankful that you agreed to join us today and share your experience and expertise with us. And today we have a very interesting topic, actually, and it's about one of the biggest data breaches in the history. And I'm sure a lot of you know about it. It's about Equifax data breach. It happened, I think, back in 2017, where more than 150 million people's personal information was stolen by hackers. That included also information on social security numbers, date of birth, name, and also the credit report information, because Equifax was one of the biggest credit companies in the United States. So this was a very interesting case, and a huge case. I think there were a lot of fines to them. I don't know, more about like 700 million, I think, last time I saw. So it was very huge. So the type of information that was breached and stolen, that was also very critical. So today, Adrian will tell more, but we are going to kind of dig deep in this case and actually see what really happened and what was the main reason and cause of the breach. So Adrian, thank you once again, and I want to pass the word to you. The floor is yours. And after, we will have a time for Q&A. We have that in our platform, in Zoom platform. So if you have a question, feel free to post, and you can also ask after the webinar. So thank you very much, Adrian, once again. And the floor is yours. So.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for that intro, Marie. Very, very generous intro. So Equifax, this happened a long time ago. Why are we talking about it now? So a few different reasons for that. The first is Equifax, the actual vulnerability that was used to initially get into Equifax was a Struts vulnerability, very, very similar to what we saw with Log4j. Both Java libraries, a lot of organizations had trouble finding these libraries in their environment. And also the investigation that the U.S. government ordered after this breach, those details didn't become public until 18 months after the breach. And in fact, we didn't even know Equifax had been hacked until I think 4 or 5 months after this vulnerability came out. So Log4j happened in December. That's only 2 months ago. There's all kinds of breaches that maybe happened with Log4j that we haven't heard about yet, if we take the Equifax timeline into account. And yeah, as a matter of fact, I've heard there's rumors that there were quite a few breaches because of Log4j.
Okay. Do you have a presentation or something that you would like to share?
I do, and I have not had enough coffee yet to realize that I hadn't shared that already.
Yeah, it's very early. You're in Tennessee, right, Adrian?
Yeah, no, it's not that early.
Okay.
I don't have a good excuse.
Yeah, now
But
all is
yeah,
good. Yeah, we can see.
thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, so the tagline that I've added to this that came to me last night is, yes, failures are bad. But especially when there's somebody else's failures, they're great learning opportunities. So I came up with this tagline: a failure is a terrible thing to waste. So yeah, a bad thing happened, you failed, but the worst thing is not to learn from it, right? All right, so my background, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. If you're really curious, you can Google me. I'm easy to find. Adrian Sanabria is still a fairly uncommon name. There are a few football stars out there with my name in South America, but yeah, only one in cybersecurity that I know of. But yeah, I've been a practitioner. I've been a pen tester. I've been on the business side, on the vendor side. I've done a little bit of everything. So, and this is, most breaches are more complex than the headlines would lead you to believe. And the headlines with Equifax were very centered around how, the attackers got their initial foothold into the environment, which was a Struts 2 vulnerability. Struts 2 is a Java library. I think actually officially supported by the Apache Foundation, same as Log4j. And unfortunately, without all the details, that's what we're going to see. So just keep this in mind, that a lot of these breaches, there's a deeper story, and sometimes it can take, like in this case, 18 months before we see those details. But when they do come out, absolutely go take a look, dig into them. It's worth your time to understand how the company got breached and all the factors that contributed to that breach. All right, so how do most breaches happen? And typically, this is what I'm saying. There's only a few cases I can think of. SQL injection is one case where, yeah, you can siphon an entire database out through a website, and that one is kind of one and done. But most breaches take many, many steps. They occur over days or weeks or months. When we look at that headline, oh, they didn't patch Struts. It's never that simple, or rarely that simple. And one of the things I bristle at, I don't like hearing people say that, oh, defenders have to be right 100% of the time, and attackers only have to get it right once. Because first of all, it's not really true. And second of all, it's not the most motivating thing to say to someone who's in charge of defending a company or defending a network. It's a very demoralizing statement. So instead, I like to say, defenders only need to detect an attacker once. They don't have to see everything the attacker does. They only have to detect them once. And attackers, to stay hidden, have to evade every time. So I think that's a little more encouraging statement, and more true. So common traits across breaches, though the statistics say exploits, vulnerable software is only used in 3% of breaches, that's actually an increase numerically over previous years. So it's not that it never happens, it happens when it's convenient. So if there is low-hanging fruit, if there are old vulnerabilities available, absolutely, the attackers are going to use it. So don't take this to think that, remediating vulnerabilities, patching systems is not important. It's just that even if you do all that, you're still a target. There are still ways to get in. And, how we see malware used has shifted. We still call, probably the most common breach today we call ransomware, but ransomware isn't really that important anymore. Ransomware is often used very, very late in the attack. It's the final stage of the attack as the lever to get money, to extort money out of the business. But the many, many steps before that look like a typical pen test these days. Attackers will use phishing to get in. They'll use cred stuffing, stealing people's passwords. Once they get in, they try and find elevated privileges. They try and dump cached credentials from a Windows system, for example. They attack Active Directory. They pivot to other systems. And only very, very, very late in that attack will they use ransomware. So it's kind of ironic that we refer to these types of attacks as ransomware when it's really just the final stage. So we see that a lot more often these days, where malware is used in middle or later stages of the attack, not as much in the initial stages. And yeah, many, many steps. Like I mentioned before, SQL injection and open S3 bucket, there's a very small number of cases where it's a small number of steps that the breach takes, usually 4 or more steps. And as I mentioned before, most of these attacks look like penetration tests. If you take any general penetration test methodology, that's what these extortion crews are using. That's what these ransomware crews are using to get into companies. And it's worked for pen testers for the last 2 decades, and it's working for them now. So this is a little bit of a sad point here, that we've been practicing for these types of attacks for 2 decades. We've never gotten good at stopping them, and now that's what we're actually up against in real life. So again, a failure is a terrible thing to waste. Even though a pen test is a simulated attack, meant to emulate criminals and adversaries, I don't think we took them seriously enough, and we learned enough from them over the years. All right, so getting to the Equifax breach itself. Actually, Marie, how long? What time do you want me to try and wrap up this?
I think you have about at least 30 to 40 minutes. So
okay.
So 30 minutes at least, it's okay. And then for Q&A. So
yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, and if anyone has any questions as I go through this, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or drop them in the chat. I'm fine with answering them as I go through this. All right, so the Equifax breach itself. So this the Struts vulnerability came out, and the initial impression was that Equifax was slow. They didn't take it seriously. They neglected to patch. But in reality, they were actually pretty quick to notice it and to respond by sending out notices to everyone. I think this mailing list that I think GTVM stands for Global Threat and Vulnerability Management, the Global Threat and Vulnerability Management Group. So they're responsible for looking for new threats and notifying everyone of new threats. So this email went to something like 250 people across IT and security. So everybody knew about this vulnerability within 48 hours of it being announced. So that's good, and they put together meetings, they discussed it. I think the requirement was actually after they announced it, they said that this is a critical vulnerability and it needs to be patched within 48 hours. And this is where things start to go wrong. So it's actually a week after the vulnerability is announced that they actually even start scanning for it. So on March 14th, they really start working on it. And there's already evidence of people trying to exploit it on their systems, but the attackers don't actually get in for another couple of months. So Equifax has some time to correct this here. They have some time to fix this. And they're using tools to look for struts in their environment. They really don't know how to find a Java library in their environment. So they find nothing. They look for it, they take it seriously, they don't find it, and they say, I guess we don't have the vulnerability. I guess we don't have struts. And they move on to other things. And 2 months later, the attackers do finally get in. and they start moving throughout the environment. They start dropping web shells. They start looking for credentials, getting into databases, and these databases are where all those details that Marie talked about on 150 million plus people were stored, because that's what Equifax does. Equifax stores personal data that's related to your credit, running credit reports and things like that, and not just in the U.S. either, the UK and others as well. And so they went undetected for 76 days, and we'll get into how they did finally get detected. But the point here is, the attempt to find the vulnerability in the environment failed because they didn't know how to use their tools correctly. They were using the wrong tools to look for it. They just didn't know how to find struts. And the system that was attacked, ACIS, is the system you would use to contest things on your credit report. Like if something bad showed up in your credit report and it was actually intended for a different person, this is the system where you would contest that and you would say, hey, this shouldn't be on my credit report. And you would report it using the system. It had been around since the late 70s. And so it was an old legacy system. Not a lot of people understood it. If there was documentation on it, it'd probably been lost, probably existed as paper. I don't even know that it would have been digital, locked in a file cabinet somewhere. So the system was poorly understood. And there was no SBOM. There was no list of software on the system that anybody could search for the Struts, software, the Struts library. And Equifax had a lot of systems. So they really needed an asset inventory. They really needed an inventory of all the software that they had. This is not the ideal situation. When you find out a single software library is vulnerable, you don't want to be actively searching your systems to see if you have that library. You want to already have that database, that asset inventory of everything that you have that you can easily and quickly search to see if you have, Log4j or Struts or whatever that library may be. And one of the misunderstandings in the public, a lot of folks didn't understand what Struts was and how Struts is used. In a J2EE application, if you're not familiar, Struts is just a single jar file, a single library that exists as a single file within a web directory, within a web application. And it's not something that's registered with the operating system, so simply updating operating system patches or software patches is going to update Struts. In fact, in a lot of situations, when you're updating software libraries, sometimes functionality is deprecated, so you actually have to rewrite code to be able to move to a newer version of the library. So it's as you can see here, it's not as simple as run these patches or run these updates on this system. And a lot of people didn't fully understand that. So a common question I saw was, why didn't they patch? Why didn't they just patch? And so finally, how Equifax discovered this, they actually had an IDS system that somewhat depended on they called it an SSL visibility system. TLS inspection is another term. Basically, internally, you're decrypting all your encrypted traffic to look for threats in that traffic. The problem was they hadn't maintained the system. There are many expired certificates on the system, and they had been expired for 18 months. So Equifax had spent a ton of money on security. They had all the tools, but they didn't know how to use them, or they didn't maintain them. So this is another one of the big failures here. The moment they updated those certificates, within an hour, they knew they had a problem. They saw connections going to China directly from their systems. In this case, China did turn out to be the actor that hacked into Equifax, and they weren't even trying to hide. They weren't even going through proxies. They were just straight from China right into Equifax. noisy as you can be, making it easy to detect them, but the tools had not been maintained, so they didn't see it until they did finally update it. So that's how Equifax found out that they had been hacked. Within 24 hours, they took the system offline, and started to notify everybody. So again, we see some parts of Equifax's processes and procedures work well. They have good playbooks in place. They just don't have the experience or the training to do a lot of this correctly. A lot of things fell down and broke and were allowed to remain broken. So very much looks like they're doing an investigation for the first time in a lot of these cases. A lot of these are very simple issues that you would discover if you practiced incident response. And I think that's one of the key takeaways here is, especially security operations, incident response should be treated like a sport. If this is a sport that you practice once a year, when you go up against a professional team like China, you're not going to do very well. You're gonna look foolish. And I don't know what the right frequency is. If you're a big company like Equifax, you should probably train against scenarios like this, against breach scenarios, probably weekly, I would say, at least once a month, but once a year is not enough to train to be able to stop something like this. All right. So like I was saying, not bad. Once they actually knew, once they updated their systems that told them that they were hacked, their response wasn't terrible. And only now, finally, they realize how they got hacked. They begin to investigate. They find out that they did indeed have struts. They missed it the first time that they looked for it. And they found more and more systems that had struts on it once they knew what to look for and how to find it. So again, we see them learning for the first time how to find a Java library in their environment. And finally, they're catching up here. So putting everything together, I identified 29 control failures that contributed or were directly responsible for the Equifax breach, based on the details that came out in this report that's publicly available. And I've highlighted the ones that I think had the biggest impact. So earlier I mentioned the lack of a software inventory. You should already know what you have before you need to find those details. You should already have a database or an asset inventory of all your software, all your systems, what's running on them. That makes it a lot easier when a vulnerability like this pops up, a critical vulnerability, to just do a query in that database and see if you have it. Another big one was the database credentials. So number 16 here, number 15 and 16, basically this is, I assume it was like a JDBC file that had database connect strings. And typically with a database connect string, you'll have, the IP address of the server, the database name or the schema name, and then the username and password to connect to it. This system, the ACIS system, only needed access to 3 databases, but in a lot of cases, you'll see companies that don't want to manage different versions of these database credential files. So they'll just put all the databases in one file and they'll use that file everywhere. And that was the case here. So the file that was on the ACIS system that the attackers got access to had 48 databases listed. So all of a sudden, when they get into this one system, they not only have access to the 3 databases that this system uses, but 45 other databases as well. And this is what made it so easy for them to connect to these databases, start doing queries, start pulling this data and exfiltrating this data. And none of that was noticed. Nobody noticed that activity. Another one that was kind of another one of these things where it was great that they did this, that they created a custom snort rule to detect this attack. And then they deployed that custom snort rule. They did this very early on, long before the attackers actually got in. Nobody tested the snort rule. The snort rule did not work. It did not detect anything. Nobody thought to test it before putting it into production. So that was, good initiative. It's great that you thought to do that, but the fact that nobody thought to test it again supports this kind of idea that this huge company, this Equifax, nobody had the experience to realize, oh, we should probably test this before releasing it and make sure that it actually detects the attack. I'm not going to go through all of these, but yeah, these are the ones I think had the biggest impact. And because there's so many, I actually use a friend of mine, Sunil Yu, put together this rubric, this system for mapping out. So you can use it to map out a lot of things. You can use it to map out your security controls, the security products that you've bought, to look for gaps and things like that in your environment. And so across the, I guess that's the y-axis here, you have the different types of things that you're protecting, everything from people to devices. And then across the x-axis, across the top here, you have the stages of doing security, I guess. So identify would be like running vulnerability scans, any kind of preparation, putting antivirus into place. That would be identify and protect. Protect would be, again, antivirus, anything that actively stops attacks. And IPS, what else would be under protect? Like a WAF, web application firewall, would be under protect. And then detect, respond, and recover. Those we know pretty well now in the age of ransomware. Having good backups, detecting that the attack has occurred, kicking out the attackers, and recovering from any damage done. So you can see all these control failures plotted on here. We've got quite a few under detect. So I think 10 and 11 there, I think those are the snort rules that I talked about. 10 and 11 was they tried to set themselves up where they would see if the attackers got in, but they didn't test it. But most of the failures we see are in the early stages, are things that they could have done beforehand to stop this. And the vast majority we see are under identify and protect here. And again, there were no technical failures here. These were all, I think one could be considered a people failure, a personal failure, where somebody was using a tool incorrectly, but the rest were process related. Not testing the snort rule, I wouldn't blame that on an individual. That's a process thing. There should be a process somewhere that says, hey, every time we create a new detection, it needs to be tested before it goes into production. So that's a step missing from their documentation, from their process. And as I mentioned, they owned all the tech they needed. All the tech they had worked when used correctly. So it really comes down to process failures. And the best way to find process failures is, as I mentioned before, practice. Treat it like a sport. It's, if you don't do it, you don't find what's missing if you don't practice at this. So it's, I think that's an important takeaway here. And that's why my tagline is a failure is a terrible thing to waste. Because also, even though Equifax didn't have the experience or the practice to stop this attack, 18 months after it happened, which was in, what would that be, 2000, I think it was maybe late, like December 2018, this report came out, and not enough people read this report. This was an opportunity to learn from Equifax's failures, and anybody who read through that would have been a lot more prepared for Log4j when Log4j came out. And very clearly, you could see which vendors were prepared for Log4j. Some vendors, within just a few days, had a list of all their affected products and applications after Log4j came out. Some vendors, it took them weeks before they had that list available. So you could tell who was prepared for it and who wasn't. All right. So some references here. As I mentioned, this report that I got all these details out of, there's actually several reports, are all publicly available. Harvard Business Review actually has a case study on it. I think it cost me $8 to buy it. That also has some interesting details. One of the nice things about this report is it's not just technical details. It doesn't look like an incident report that you would expect to come from Mandiant or something like that. They interviewed people. When reading this report, you get a feeling for what the attitude was like when they're dealing with this, and what people were thinking. How important this was to them. You really got a sense of the culture there at the company, and the culture was one of the big issues. Their attitude towards security, and so not just the technical failures. A lot of good details in that report. Getting direct quotes from people who were involved was really helpful in understanding how it happened. All right, absolutely. Somebody's asking to share the presentation. I'm happy to do that. I will send a copy over as soon as we're done here. Any other questions?
No questions. Let's see. Oh, there.
We've got plenty of time, so I don't mind waiting a moment.
We have a lot of thank yous and claps and comments. How terrific your presentation was, Adrian. So thank you very much. Really, it was very interesting. And the tagline is very perfectly suited for this. It's a terrible thing to waste. So,
yeah.
So we have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know. It put it in the chat, but if you can see it, I can. Yeah, I think you can see it, but I can also read it out loud. So, hi, thanks a lot for presentation.
Yeah. So yeah, the question.
Yeah.
A system for software inventory. Honestly, for small and medium-sized businesses, I'm not sure. For larger businesses, we saw a lot of people have success with software composition analysis tools. So like Sonatype and Synopsys, Veracode, I think a lot of those companies have those. I don't think those are really priced for small and medium-sized companies, though. So I'm not sure I have a good answer there. Most of the software inventory systems I know of, and you don't even have to buy something. I've seen a lot of companies just put together their own, or use existing asset management systems. A lot of asset management tools will have the ability to collect software in there as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some open source ones out there as well. But yeah, sorry, I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know any that are ideal for smaller companies.
Okay. So any more questions? Yeah, there is another one. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a dedicated pen tester, but somebody that is, can figure out how the exploit works and run that exploit. So in a lot of organizations, maybe you have a developer who's a security lead who knows how to use some exploit tools and things like that, who knows how to simulate attacks. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a dedicated pen tester, but certainly you need that skill set, because if you can't test like an attacker would, then you have to cross your fingers and hope you've done it right. Yeah, very important skill to have.
Another question here we have.
Yeah. Getting off the tips for starting an internal blue team with some security interested IT staff. Getting off the ground. Yeah, I think, some operational stuff like we covered here, the ability to respond to an incident, the ability to find, you need to have monitoring tools. You need to know how to find attacks in those tools. So operational experience, I think, would be better than, having that internal blue team start making policies and things like that. Policies are important at some stage, but I think it's initially more important to get good at operational security. So I think everybody needs to be prepared for managing an incident and understanding who would be in charge. Like I've seen a lot of incidents where everyone panics, and you see several people doing the same thing instead of coordinating and communicating with each other. So certainly you need to know who's in charge when bad things happen. So yeah, I would suggest putting together an incident response plan, practicing it. That's where I would start. And maybe that's just because of the presentation I just gave. That's what comes off the top of my head, but it's pretty important.
Yeah, again, a lot of thank yous and appreciations. Mm-hmm. Any more questions?
All right, Marie, I will get you a copy of the slides.
Yeah, but I have another question before.
Oh, sure. Go for it.
So what do you think, what's your feeling? Did industry actually learn from Log4j, or will be again unprepared when something similar happens?
I think, again, because thousands of vendors were affected by this is something that didn't happen with Struts. Because so many vendors were affected. I think a Veracode study showed that 1/3 of all Java applications used Log4j. So this was so widespread, it affected so many people that sold software or services or something like that had to report to their customers that we actually have a much better idea of how prepared people were. And all you have to do is look at how long it took vendors to respond and to say, to provide their list of applications that were vulnerable. Actually, the CISO for Cisco talked to he testified before the U.S. Senate yesterday, or at least a Senate subcommittee, and was talking about the speed, that Cisco was able to find Log4j in their environment, and which was pretty good. I think they did a pretty good job. Other vendors, I think McAfee especially took a really long time to get details out, which, I mean, for a security company is not a good look. So I think it was you could tell who was prepared, and then I think it was a very good event for people that weren't prepared. And I think we're still going to see Log4j fallout for years. People are still going to be finding Log4j in new things for many years. I don't think we found it all.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. Do we have another question here? Maybe you want to look at it. So what would you recommend for newcomers to the field? What resources, what to-dos and don'ts?
Yeah, so newcomers to the field, I think it's important to have a solid technical background. So I see a lot of people trying to come directly into security, but really security is a secondary layer on top of other things. So if we're talking about database security, you should understand databases really, really well before you try to do anything specific in database security or network security. You need to understand how TCP/IP works, how networks are built, network architecture. There's a lot of underlying foundational knowledge that you need for most jobs in security. I think more than anything, a lot of security roles, you're advising people in IT or on the business side. And if you don't have an appreciation for what they do or how they do their jobs, it's difficult to build that rapport and to gain their trust, to where they'll want to do what you're recommending. So it's good to, when those people know that you've been in their shoes, that you've done their job, I think they're more likely to listen. So I think it helps from that perspective as well. Yeah, especially if you're telling somebody that they've done something wrong, I think they're more likely to listen if they know that you've done their job before. So I personally don't recommend coming directly into security. Yeah, I think it's important to spend some time on and you don't have to do everything. You don't have to be a database administrator, network administrator, system. You don't have to do all those jobs. But as long as if you've been a developer for a while, if you're a sysadmin for a while, I think that's a good background. Cloud engineer is now a very common entry level position that I'm seeing. Yeah. Great. And resources, there's tons of resources out there. There used to be nothing, but now there are all these like hacking labs. There's capture the flag things you can do, hack the box. I can't give you a list off the top of my head, but there's so many great resources out there. Cybersecurity, I think, is one. A lot of training resources out there. A lot of YouTube and Twitch. Folks on YouTube and Twitch that teach security stuff. So yeah, more than ever, more resources than there's ever been.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, we are doing a lot of CTFs here, and we have a good community and also on Discord, so everybody can join our Discord server. And then I can also invite you, Adrian, and then maybe there can be a lot of interesting discussions there. So yeah, just saying that we are trying to, and that's also our aim. I mean, the way you said that technical part is important, and through all our trainings, we are trying to ensure that the fundamentals of the knowledge, of the technical knowledge, are in place before we start working with security. Because we always like to compare this with, medicine, saying that people definitely need to know very well anatomy and chemistry before they actually go to know which direction of they need to choose to become a dentist or surgeon or whatever. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah, I think you answered the question already in written form. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. No more questions. I think it was very interesting, Adrian. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation, sharing it with us and with our InfoSec community, especially for this time. I know a lot of people would love to join from United States because of time constraint, they were not able. But in any case, we will have the recording. We will also share, so you can also share. And the people who didn't manage to join us live, they will still be able to watch the video. So thank you very much. And if there are no more questions, you just send me over the presentation, and I also share with people who have registered to our network. Great. Thank you, Adrian. And thank you, everyone. And stay tuned for our next guests. And we'll still have a chance again to invite Adrian sometime with his busy schedule. Thank you, everyone, and have an awesome day. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
Marie. Bye.
Bye.